CFRA, I did probably 6 or 8 parody songs. I did one called Shirley's Cannonball, which was about the O Train.
Right.
I did one about Sven Robinson stealing that ring. Sven Robinson, for those who don't know, was the first openly gay member of Parliament from the Sunshine Coast in BC.
Here in Canada.
Right. And he stole a $64,000 ring from an auction house in BC. And there's a whole story to that I won't bore you with, but I took that song, took that event, and put it to use the tune of Coming Around the Mountain, and said Ben Robinson, he liked that shiny ring. It was called the Shiny Ring. And when I did that, and I don't want to talk about me too much, I want to get back to Rush, but just as an example of the power of parody, okay? I had a car dealership call the station. The owner of the car dealership was listening and was laughing so hard he almost drove off the road and wanted me to make him a disc of that song. The Boy Scouts of Canada, or the Scouts of Canada, included it in their campfire songbook.
Wow.
Now, I don't know if it's still there, but when I was on the air, it was. Anyway, so he had a great talent that a lot of other people could pick up and use when it comes to how to use humor, how to use parody, how to use your opponent's words against them. Like, that's funny. You're saying this now. Like when I tore Yasser and Akvi apart on the air, I was doing exactly what Rush would have done because I learned it from him. He used to have a tagline saying, the Rush Limbaugh show is show prep for all the other talk shows. And he was right because we learned from him.
It must have been amazing. Everybody wants to leave a legacy, at least most people do. And it must, I don't know if he ever thought much about his legacy, but to be able to leave that legacy saying, I got up every morning and went to the station and I influenced policy in America. Like, wow. Like, how much greater a legacy could you ever want than that?
Other than being president.
Yeah. And then he probably could have run for office, but if you run for office, you don't always have as much influence as you do if you're a talk show host with 70 million listeners.
Hey, listen. There were when I was on radio, a lot of people, because I was a big advocate for the military, and Rush, and I would have been that anyway without Rush, but Rush was huge for the American military.
Yeah.
And so I just took that and applied it to Canada. And people would say, well, because at the time I was still young enough, he said, why don't you just get back in the mob? And the answer was, and Rush gave the answer to him. He said, if I were to get back, if me personally, Nick Vandergraat, had gotten back into the military, I would have been a very small cog in a very big wheel and no influence other than inside that little circle. But if I stay on the outside, I can comment on any aspect of it I want to and raise awareness with the general public about what's going on.
Right.
I can be a great advocate for them because I know what life is like on the inside. And Rush, I don't know that Rush, there's nothing in anything I've read about him or know about him that says that he served in the military. But he had a love for those who did. And they understood that love to be genuine. And he was broadcast on, what do they call it, Armed Forces Radio all over the world, to places like Guam, to places like Okinawa, or not Okinawa, Japan, where they have a naval station.
Okay. Okinawa.
Is it Okinawa?
Well, Okinawa would be, yeah. Yes.
Okinawa's an island.
So is Japan.
Yes, I know, but Okinawa was a separate island. Part of the Solomon
of Japan. No, Okinawa was part of Japan.
Okay, well, whatever. Who cares?
No, you were right. I'm telling you were right the first time.
Which is really unusual.
No, you're often right the first time.
Anyway, the bottom line is, the thing that's going to be really tough to do now is to find somebody to fill those shoes.
But do you need someone to fill his shoes? Because there are so many people out there now, podcasters and radio hosts. One of my favorites is Dennis Prager. Dennis is not the same style as Rush at all. Dennis is very calm, quiet, easygoing, but he is very powerful with his words. And I love listening to Dennis Prager. I listen to him on YouTube. But, he's like... and Dennis Prager has actually said, he says, people want me to run for office. And he says, I don't want to run for office. I'd rather do what I'm doing because I have influence.
That's the same logic.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Ben Shapiro. A lot of people want Ben to run for president. Now,
No,
I've never
don't do
heard
it, Ben.
What's that?
Don't do it, Ben. Don't do it.
But I'm just telling you that I've heard it more than once that people say, "Oh, Ben for president," and he probably wouldn't make a bad president. But I think when you look at, would you rather be the man on the throne or the man behind the curtain pulling the strings?
Well, I think it depends on who you are and your personality, etc. There are people who are cut out for that position, being elected and being a public figure of that nature, and then there are people who are more behind. But Rush Limbaugh was not behind the curtain.
Oh, no, he was
not. He was
not.
up front and center. But the thing is that when you're not in politics, and we've sort of talked about this before when we talk about, the future of the Conservative Party and what ails conservative political parties these days, particularly here in Canada. And that is that you really have to have what they had in the United States and still have, and that is an independent conservative movement that is interested in developing and advancing and promoting conservative ideas, conservative solutions to contemporary social, political, whatever problems.
Right.
Without having to worry about the need to get elected. Because the function of a political party, at its most basic level, is to get elected, and then once elected, to stay elected. That's the top of their agenda. They may be, to a greater or lesser extent, conservative, or to a greater or lesser extent, liberal. But whatever their sort of underlying political philosophy or approach is, ultimately, they're prepared to make compromises to their principles and to their policies in order to get elected and to, as I say, to stay elected. Now, that's not a bad thing. I'm not throwing stones at them for that. I'm just saying that's the reality. And in the United States, you have an independent conservative movement that doesn't care about all of those issues, and you have talk show hosts, and you have writers, and you have political commentators, pundits, etc., who are out there talking about ideas without having to deal with the electoral problem. And we don't have that very strongly here in Canada. My criticism, I for sure, as you know, I've been critical of the Conservative Party and Conservative Party leadership, political leadership, for a number of reasons. But really, the truth is that most of the criticism ought to be directed to the leaders, quote unquote, of the conservative movement, because too much power, too much leadership is ceded to the leaders of the political party. And as a consequence, the agenda of the party becomes the agenda of the movement. So we've all been involved in the conservative movement in Canada in one form or another over the years. How often have we heard it said, you can't talk about that, because if you talk that way or you bring that subject up, then the Conservatives will never get elected. And so we censor ourselves. I try not to censor myself too much, and I know, Nick, you don't, and Chris, you're going to have, now that you're tied in with us from time to time, okay, you're going to get painted with that brush as well. But the point is that too many ostensible leaders of our movement are prepared to self-censor because they buy into the idea that they are part of the political process. And to a degree that may be true, but in a different way than the politicians. And so what you have to do if you're leading the movement, and this is, I think, where Rush came in and where he was brilliant, was that he wasn't interested in electoral politics, at least not in the sense that he would say, well, I'm not going to talk about this issue or that issue because it's unpopular, and therefore I might be harming the Republicans' opportunity to get elected. No, he was all about plowing the road, cultivating the ground, okay, making the soil fertile, so that on two levels, so that those ideas would grow and become more popular in both political parties in the United States, quite frankly, although maybe not as much today, but But there was that. And plus, the more extreme Rush Limbaugh was, the less extreme the politicians would be, even though they were moving more towards him.
Yeah.
Okay?
He
was sort of like, don't know what the term for it is, but he was sort of like a lightning rod, okay?
Yeah.
Everybody could focus on Rush Limbaugh.
Right.
Okay.
He's a bullet magnet.
Right, okay, and go, okay, and politicians could go, well, I'm not as bad as Rush Limbaugh. I believe this, and so it was, you sort of drag the political process in your direction. And that, I think, was the Rush's legacy, quite apart from, the whole, forget about politics and forget about policy and all that stuff. Just generically speaking, the whole talk radio industry.
Well, the one thing
he's like the founding father of the modern talk radio industry.
I don't think you can overstate that. Now, the one thing about Rush was he did not you're right about the political side of things. He didn't care about that because he would hold his own guys to the same standard he held the other guys.
Exactly.
And if they needed criticizing or if they needed a good swift kick in the pants, he'd give it to them.
Right.
And he was not afraid. He did not have to worry.
Well, there was no kicking him out of caucus.
That's exactly my point. Yep. So if somebody says, shh, don't talk about that, the Conservatives won't get elected, he would say, well, maybe they don't deserve to be elected because of X, Y, Z. And you're right. We need something like that in Canada.
Which is, kind of what we're trying to do a little bit of.
Well, if we can be the seed that gets that started, that's fine with me.
Well, they say, it's a simple principle. Be yourself, and good things will happen. So Rush was himself, and that's the key to his success was, I don't care what you think of me. This is my opinion. Here it is. Take it or leave it.
To use a Canadian analogy, he would go to the net and put his stick on the ice.
That's right.
But one thing I think that's very important about Rush Limbaugh to mention, and that was he took his job seriously. He didn't take himself that seriously as in I'm an important person or anything, but he understood the influence that he had, and as a consequence of that, he chose his words carefully. He researched the material. He knew what he was talking about. It wasn't just, and I'm sorry I have to say this with all due respect, there are many talk show hosts out there on both the left and the right that are just, blowhards. They're just out there to create as much controversy as they can,
just
and why? Because, well, they could sell books that way and things like that, or they can get speaking engagements. There are a number of them out there like that. Not all, maybe not even most, but there are a number out there like that. But Rush, he understood, I think. I never met the man, but I had a sense that he really took his position seriously, and he understood the responsibility that rested on his shoulders as a result of his popularity. And he had an obligation to make sure that what he was saying was sensible, it was well-researched, well-documented, and even if you didn't agree with him and the conclusions that he was drawing, if you were a thinking person, you had to concede that, he was making valid points on many of these issues.
I only heard him lose his temper on the air once in all the years that I listened to him. There was a guy out of California called Zookeeper Bob. And to this day, this has got to be 15, 20 years ago, he said something that just drove Rush beyond the limit. And he said, "Sir, you are an ass, sir. Don't ever call this show again and darken my phone line with your presence, sir." And I'm going, what the hell did he say? To this day, I don't know what Zookeeper Bob, but it's the only time I ever heard Rush lose control.
Wow.
He just let him have it with both barrels.
Okay, we're going to have to go for a break, ladies and gentlemen. So we'll be back in a few minutes. If you're listening to the live show, stay put. If you are listening to the podcast, thank you for joining us for this session or this segment, and we will catch you the next time around in part 2 of this week's episode of the Nick and Joe Show on ThinkRadio.ca.